Good morning. As Terry mentioned, I took my Tesla-powered 1940 Chevy on drag week last year, became the first person to complete the event in an electric conversion, and the second to do so in an EV. So just as a disclaimer, nothing you're about to see should be considered a good idea. Performed by untrained professionals on public roads. So starting out with what is drag and drive. So the big idea comes out of trying to determine who actually has the fastest street car by making cars drive from track to track, make multiple passes over the course of the week, and deciding winners based on average times from each of those passes. Cars cannot be trailered, can't be towed. They must be worked on by people riding in the vehicle, and you must bring all your tools, supplies, luggage, everything in the car or in a small trailer towed behind, which is how you end up with some great photos of 3,000 horsepower Pro Mods towing trailers in the rain. The event originally came out of Hot Rod Magazine and their Fastest Street Car in America event, which evolved into the style of events that you see NMCA do, where it's a quick 30-mile drive to prove that the car is street legal before running an event. That quickly evolved into Drag Week, which involves 5 days, 4 tracks in a loop, so day 1 and 5 are the same track. And then that was the only event for a while. Then it began to grow with Rocky Mountain Race Week and Midwest Street Drags. And then there was an absolute explosion as many automotive influencers, Mike Finnegan, Alex Taylor, and so on, started building cars for these events. And now there's even a dedicated magazine, Sick the Mag, that covers the events, and there's over 40 events worldwide. I believe now there's some in Canada, Australia, I think Sweden has one. That one may not be legal, but most the events in the U.S. really range from sort of the Drag Week being the big premier event to some smaller events that are a couple days over a weekend, but the bulk of them are around the sort of week-long concept. So why do this? My original goal when I set out to do this in 2015 was to be the first EV on Drag Week. And a gentleman took a Model S in 2019, so I switched to being the first conversion on Drag Week. And really the goal was to prove that it could be done and that I could do it. So, car. It's a 1940 Chevy Coupe with a Tesla large drive unit, 2 Chevy Volt batteries, Model 3 PCS, and Chademo fast charging. Most of the control is by various open inverter boards and a modified sync BMS to run the stock Volt BMS. Now, before the event, I did have a few known problems in the spring of last year. First, the PCS has proven to be exceptionally temperamental, and mine is no different. For some reason, it would see the correct amperage and voltage available, and then decide only 2 kilowatts were available, even though there were 7. And then I had an additional problem that has since been sorted out with the tune, where if you went full throttle off the line, you'd get about half a second of a pull, and then it would hit a safety and shut off. So if you rolled into it, you could launch, but otherwise it was hitting this safety. It appears that it was desaturating the IGBTs, and that was tripping in a weird way, so it was very hard to track down where the issue was in the tune. Then, last spring, I decided to try to do a leg of Hot Rod Power Tour and discovered that the batteries that I thought might be in the range of 60 miles were about 50 on the nose. And so I decided to swap from first generation to second generation Chevy Volt batteries. I stayed with Volt stuff because of the time constraint and that they would fit the battery box I had already built, which was really integrated into the chassis of the car. But that meant I only picked up a little bit of range. The car's got about 60 to 65 now. And then this was further complicated by, around this time last year, NHRA announced sweeping changes to their EV rules. And most of them were changes in approach more than really anything that was more significant, but they were a different way than the old rules approached things. So I ended up talking with the Hot Rod technical director who worked with the technical director for the NHRA, and we agreed that I would do as many of the changes as I could, but let them know which ones weren't capable. Some of them involved moving, I ended up having to move the firewall a few inches forward because they needed it further away from the battery pack than previously. And then some of them were small things, like adding a tow hook to the front of the car that was properly labeled. But some of them that didn't fully get integrated was they wanted, instead of, the old rules required that the rear and dash kill switches shut absolutely everything off, and the new rules want the BMS and warning lights to stay on even when the car is turned off. So that didn't fully get implemented, and right now all the other sanctioning bodies don't use that. They use the older rules that want everything off. So that meant that I spent every waking hour last summer trying to implement all of these changes. But now I will try to get to the point and get to the event. So day one is tech and testing. And as I was still working on the car the morning of, I got there with about an hour left before registration ended, and it promptly started raining, where I discovered that the rear window and the rear hatch leaked onto electronics inside that I did not want water leaking onto. So I spent a few hours running in and out of the truck I had towed there with to dry things off and try to keep things from getting wet. That also meant I had no time to do testing to try to fix this tune issue before the event started, because track testing was done for the day with the rain. So first day in Darlington, my first pass, even though I tried to roll in, did hit that shut off. I had to coast around and come back, and rolled in the next one, got a decent 13-second pass, but it was a full pass, so I moved on to head out on the drive. One of the things about Hot Rod Drag Week especially is you only get the route once you've turned in your time slip for the day. You have to follow the exact route. If you leave it, you have to return back to the exact point you left, which they try to route you mostly on back roads. So the first drive, the first half was fairly easy because the route largely followed I-95, so they were quick diversions off the route to go get a charge. In fact, the second charge of the day was at the first checkpoint that you had to stop at and take a photo of to prove that you followed the route. The second half became a problem. From Fayetteville all the way over to Rockingham, there is basically no fast charging infrastructure there. There's a fast charger in Hamlet, which is a little bit past Rockingham, and there were some level 2 chargers, but obviously with BCS having an issue, that became problematic. There was a level 2 charger around the corner from the second checkpoint, except it was full of cars that by that point at around midnight had plugged in and gone to sleep. So had to hunt around and find another charger there. And then leaving that checkpoint, I got about a mile down the road, and right in front of a cop, one of the axles fell out of the car. For some reason, the driver's side CV joints to the, it has a Porsche 930 adapters to the drive unit. Those bolts seem to back out no matter how much Loctite I put on them. So that's now part of the routine with the car, is to check them, because that was the second time I had the axle come out of the car. But had to fix that on the side of the road. Fortunately, there's enough room to slide under the car and get them in there, and only one of the bolts had actually snapped. So I was able to get into Rockingham around 3 a.m., and they have RV hookups, so I was able to plug in for a few hours and get a little bit of sleep. So the second day, I headed off to that fast charger that was about 7 miles from the track, and also picked up some bolts at a hardware store to fix the axle properly. And I had the car back together about 10 minutes after my run group was done for the day. Hot Rod runs 4 run groups, A, B, C, and D, based on expected ET, and then an all run after that. So I was in run group C, and was a little late for that, so I had to wait for the all run. And again, ended up having to do 2 passes, as the first hit the shut off and the second was clean. And then I had some problems with the DC to DC of the BCS not kicking on, so I had to jump the car to get it to start up, and left the track around 5 p.m. to head out on what I believe was the longest route of the entire event, and what ended up being just straight up torture. Again, the first half of this drive was not that bad. There was plenty of charging infrastructure. I was slowed down a bit when trying to make up time in the Charlotte area, which is covered with chargers. I realized the temp gauge was not coming back down when I let out of the throttle, and one of the water pumps running coolant back to the large drive unit had failed. Fortunately, an AutoZone 1 exit down from where I discovered this had one, so I could do that swap in the parking lot in 15 minutes and keep going. But after Hickory, which is where the route kind of hangs a left north of Charlotte, Hickory was the last fast charger on the route. There were a few level 2 chargers through the mountains there, but again, the PCS was acting up. It ended up not kicking the DC to DC on at one point on the road, and I noticed that when the headlights started to dim. And I had a generator with me to jump the car again and get it rolling. It ended up taking all of that night and the next day to get to Bristol. I ended up stuck about 6 miles down the mountain from Bristol Dragway in Elizabethton, Tennessee, sitting on a level 2 charger that was providing 7 kilowatts, but I could only pull 2 from it. And I had rolled in basically pushing the car to the station, so it took a long time. But I rolled in at around 2 o'clock and got the 22nd time slip for not being able to make a pass, but making it there with the intent to do so. Fortunately, I literally rolled in as the tech director was leaving, and he gave me the time slip. This did not end that day's torture, however, because I was still 7 miles from the nearest fast charger on the other side of Bristol. So it took another 5 hours to get to that fast charger because the first level 2 that was nearby at the electric company was not working. So fortunately, there was a Nissan dealership that, even though their outside chargers had been disabled because they were upgrading to a fast charger, they still had one level 2 inside, and they let me bring the car in and charge there for an hour or so. But yes, I rolled into the charger with a generator on the roof, putting about 1 kilowatt of power into the car, which was just enough to keep it rolling, kind of. And then, was able to charge in about, I turned down the rate a bit to be gentle to the battery, but was able to get a full charge there and head out on what turned out to be the easiest route, even though it was about 300 miles, I think, down to Carolina Dragway in Aiken, South Carolina. I had one issue with an older EVgo station that didn't want to talk to the car, and fortunately there was another one nearby. But there was plenty of charging along this route. Really, the only challenge was the fact that I had not really slept in a couple days at this point. That photo on the left there is at I think a Sam's Club in Asheville, North Carolina, at somewhere around midnight, I think. And then the second photo, there's the one checkpoint, which was where I was very close to being there. But I got into Carolina at around 10:30 with just enough time to make my run group for the morning and make the best pass in the car's history. Even though I was rolling, I did not get to full throttle till the 8th mile, but it ran 12.65 at 1:13. The hot rod staff loved it, and I have a clip of the run here. Hopefully the audio works. The two voices you're going to hear are Brian Loans, the lead announcer for the NHRA, and David Freiberger of Roadkill, and the guy that sells Gasoline Forever t-shirts, just for some context.
$9.99. Here comes the Electro Chevrolet. Paul Mangelsdorf, the 1940 Chevrolet Coupe that has Tesla motors, and it has a pair of Chevrolet Volt batteries in it. He built this whole thing from junkyard parts. Went 13s the other day.
And he's camping in it, not by choice, but because it runs out of battery power every 72 miles or something like that.
He did not know how he was going to be able to get here today because of the lack of charging for the last, he said about 100 miles, but he's made it, and he has Sandra Fontaine in the other lane. The thing leaves like a barge, but it's moving pretty good at the top. He's going to try to get around Fontaine. He does. 12.65 for Mangelsdorf in the electrified 1940 Chevy. That's pretty awesome.
I do want to just replay it to Captain.
$9.99. Here comes the electrified 1940 Chevy. That's pretty awesome.
It's just a cool thing because I'm the Gasoline Forever guy, but I do not discourage this behavior.
$9.99. Here comes
All right. So after that, which was great, several staff members from Hot Rod came over to compliment me on being there and alive and making me laugh. And after not having slept for a couple days, it was pretty awesome. It was absolutely my favorite part of the trip. But I still had to make it back to Darlington for the next day. This route wasn't terrible in terms of charging availability, but a lot of the chargers were fairly far off route. The bottom section there below, south of Columbia, most of the chargers were 10 to 15 miles off route, which meant that I would need to, one, have that charge to get to the charger, but then burn 10 to 15 miles of my range just getting back to the route before I could continue making progress. I then had a problem in Colombia where the charger I wanted to stop at a Hyundai dealership, they turned off when their technicians left for the day, which was wonderful, but there was a Nissan dealership nearby that had one, and so I was able to keep making progress. The photo here on the bottom right was my last charge of the week in Florence, South Carolina. At that point I was about 9-10 miles from the track, and that is my favorite photo from the event, because at that point was, even though it was still 2 o'clock in the morning, 2-3 o'clock in the morning, I knew that barring something really weird, I was going to make it all the way back to the track and complete the event. Plus, I do like those faux neon chargers. They're kind of fun. Day 5 was a bit of a letdown to end the event. They told us as we were in the lanes that if we were not close to competition for our class, specifically I was running in Street Machine Eliminator, which is a little different than the other classes. All the other classes, your score is your average times for the week. Street Machine Eliminator, your average times then seed a 32-car field for a bracket race at the end of the day. So they told us if you were not anywhere close to making the 32-car field, you got one pass and you were done. So unfortunately, my pass hit the safety and shut off again. So I headed back to the pits, and I decided I was going to turn in my time slip and literally get the t-shirt for making it there. Later in the day, though, we got to the point where guys who were really close contention for winning classes were making pass after pass, trying to improve from, an 8.52 to an 8.50. And so at that point, there was not really a wait in the lanes. I decided I was going to try to fix the tune and make a change. I was going to test it in the pits because there was plenty of room at the top end of the staging lanes. And if it launched and didn't immediately shut off, I'd go try to make a pass and see what it would do. Unfortunately, when I did that, it ripped 2 of the 3 motor mounts out of the car. The rear and the side motor mounts broke, and so I was done for the day. But I had completed the week. So in terms of the aftermath, you can see the photo there of the drive unit sitting on the ground. Fortunately, there is a ton of slack in those cables, so there wasn't any damage there. And it did end up damaging part of the LDU. It broke one ear off of the side mounts, and it looks like that may have accelerated some of the coolant problems in there. And I forgot to mention, on leaving on the last drive, I got about a mile down from the track and realized something was on fire. The water pump that cooled the PCS had caught fire because it had been running basically nonstop for 5 days at that point. And fortunately, the DC to DC function doesn't make much heat. So unplugging it, I was able to keep it running for the rest of the week just without that pump, and I only needed fast charging from that point on. It did get covered in a print edition of 6th of Mag, and then that ended up online, and an additional profile put up there. So there's definitely interest in it. I will say that all of the YouTube commenters throughout the week on the live streams were losing their mind, but everyone on the event was largely supportive. There were 1 or 2 people that came up, saw what it was, and just turned and walked away, but everyone else was at least interested in it and thought that it was cool that I was out there trying to do it. So what's next for me and for the car? I finally fixed the tune, and literally on the way home from doing that, the coolant leak killed the inverter. So I swapped over to a Sport large drive unit that I had picked up previously and added a limited slip and coolant delete. That has since had issues where the 12-volt supply broke and killed that inverter. So there's parts in the mail to fix that. I'm also swapping all of the coolant pumps from the Prius ones I had been using to the Volkswagen Bosch-based pumps. They seem to be much more reliable, and I've not heard of any of them catching fire. I'm also working on replacing the PCS with the onboard charger from the Bolt and the onboard DC to DC from the Bolt. It looks like the reverse engineering on that should be fairly simple, because it appears that, like on the 2nd generation Volt, GM went just back to PWM signal to control the charger instead of CAN. I also need to actually replace the V8 springs that are in the front of the thing so that it has suspension of any kind, and actually have proper window seals and make it so that I can actually roll the windows down. There's also, copious rattles, as you'd expect in a car from 1940 that is as ratty as that one is. As I was pulling into the pits on the last day, one more washer started rattling, and I swore that I would weld every last one of them in place. It didn't shut up. So this year I'm going to be going on Drag Week again. This year Drag Week is in the Midwest, running from Columbus to Indianapolis and then up to 2 tracks in Michigan. The goals for this year, like always, are to finish, but also to sleep for 3 hours each night at least, and to try to be competitive in Street Machine Eliminator. That class you cannot run faster than 10.0, and the cutoff for the 32 car field this year was somewhere around 10.5 or 10.6. I think with the sport drive unit I should be in the 10s. Whether that'll actually be a competitive 10 and whether the car will hold together, don't entirely know. If it does, I will probably go on Sick Week in February. That's an event put on by Sick the Mag with the same concept, but slightly shorter drives. They're only 180 miles instead of 250. And they have a class for all of the oddball cars called Sick Freaks, which is EVs, rotaries, diesels, anything that they don't really have a place for otherwise. And then I'm hoping to have the car fairly well sorted to just bracket race it and enjoy the car. I do want to start looking forward to the next build, which will focus a lot more on build quality. This was absolutely a learning platform. I built a DC truck in college, but everything on this car was new for me. And I do want something with a little better range. 60 miles range gets really frustrating really quickly. And I really don't know what direction that car is going to go. If it is a street car, it's going to go more, it's going to have a little bit more comfort, be more on the pro street side than the shell that I currently drive. But I've also thought about what the limits can be pushed in a door car going more the pro mod direction, which will probably entirely depend on money and parts availability. I do want to invite you all to join this chaos. It really is an awesome adventure. I've said it was both brutally awesome and awesomely brutal. It really pushes both yourself and the car, and we built these things to drive them and more than just to cars and coffee. So I would say though, if you wanted to try something like this, that you probably need at least 60 miles of range with fast charging of some kind. A gentleman did do 6 Summer this year, which had shorter drives. I think they were around 150 with a DC powered El Camino that had about 90 miles of range and no fast charging. But I know that he did have some issues with getting charged and sleep at the same time. And the other one ability is to be able to fix and plan on the fly. Like I said, you only get the routes the day of. So the first step before I could leave the track every day was sitting down with the route and planning where I was going to leave it to go find chargers, and how I was going to make all of that work. And that bit of logistics is really what made the event possible. So thank you for listening to me blather on for a little bit. I know some of you may be on the forums, and I've started putting some videos together on YouTube of this nonsense, but that's about it.
Wow. So MacGyver is your nickname there.
Apparently, yeah.
Wow, that's impressive. Any quick questions for Paul before we move on? Yeah.
2 questions. The reason of the range is because you use the Tesla, but with the full Volt pack capacity, right?
Yeah, so I'm using 2 Chevy Volt batteries, and those were the plug-in hybrids. So they, the first generation, each pack was 16 kilowatt hours when new. The second generation was 18. When I ended up doing the replacement, I had discovered on that trip that the first gens, so the 2 of them together should have been 32 kilowatt hours if they were new. They were barely 22 kilowatt hours that they would pull from stone cold dead. The second generations should have been 36. They seem to be about 28 and a half, maybe 29 from completely dead. So yeah, the range is both because the packs are fairly low capacity, but also the car is not terribly efficient. It's very tall. The drive unit's not perfectly aligned, so I'm sure there's some loss from the CV joints there. And under hood, it's got a couple radiators, and then it hits basically a flat firewall. So I'm going to be updating some of the cooling system as I change out the chargers, and was hoping to find some way to get the air out from under the hood to maybe improve it a little. But it's seeing north of 400 watt-hours a mile.
And the second one is, any concerns with stability? It seems like a tall vehicle, and in the drag
There's a
race-
little bit. It gets a little squirrely on the top end, just depending on some tracks. The shutdown just isn't great. My sort of home quarter-mile track is Rockingham, and the track is really rough once you cross the finish line. And so it moves around a bit there. I remember one of the times I was there testing that I could see out of the corner of my eye the body and the roll cage moving in different directions as the thing was shaking. It's a very rough shutdown there. But no, a previous owner had put a G-body front clip under it, so it does have a better suspension. The problem right now is it does still have its G-body springs in it, so it's very much kind of up on its toes. So that's where I would like to replace the front springs and bring the nose down a little bit. I think it would fix the stance a little bit, as well as maybe be a little less squirrely. And also, right now the tire's rubbed, so it has the turning radius of an aircraft carrier.
A couple more, yeah.
And the sleepless prior to stay, how long did it take you to plan that route for your fast charger? Because I know we were all tired, we were all that tired, thinking kind of slowed down.
It definitely does. It was probably at least half an hour to an hour sitting there of, had the printed out map, and then there's a QR code to a Google Maps version of it, and then sitting there with basically with PlugShare, checking what was there and what the distances actually were off the route to each of them. But yeah, certainly by the last one, if I think back at what time I left the track and what time I had finished running, it's a really large gap. But some of that was also just packing everything back into the car, because I had not just a generator in my luggage, but also bins of spare parts. I had cooling issues, and that was the only bin I didn't bring with me. I had high voltage stuff, I had low voltage stuff, and as well as a full toolbox and all of that. And it did vary. The day 3 from Bristol down to Aiken was a lot easier to figure out, even though it was long, because there were so many chargers along the route that it was just marking which exit I need to get off to go to them, and maybe 1 or 2 turns after that. But on the last day, where it was going 15 miles off route, that took a little longer to plan. What's the right point to leave the route to get there, and is it really worth going to that one, or do I try to push on to the next one and run the risk of running out of power partway there?
Right on. Thank you, Paul.